Hey everyone, thanks for joining another episode of Millennial in the Middle. I'm Connor Dehlin, and I'm excited to share this interview with you today. Today we have an interview with Patrick Henry Hansen. I know, that name right there just speaks American history. And that's what this guy is all about. If our show were to have a resident historian that we were going to go back to and speak with and hear his opinions, Patrick is the guy. I actually have had the chance to meet Patrick out as a speaker. He's a professional speaker as well. And he has really built his brand around speaking about history and tying in lessons that we can learn from history to business, to management, to communication, to relationships. And it's really, really interesting, the take that he has here. He actually has a degree in political science. He's an author as well, written 5 or 6 books. In fact, if you go to Amazon and look up Patrick Henry Hansen, you can read his books that are about moments, great moments from history, and kind of how it works into the real world. Very great books. And he also speaks as a corporate trainer across the world to all sorts of different corporations, always bringing in that historical feel. So I wanted to have him on the show to talk about what we can learn from history, and then looking at our current situation right now, him as a historian, where does he see us fitting in? What lessons can we as a people learn from the past right now? His answers are very, very interesting. I want to give you a little warning, maybe is the word for this. He uses a lot of big words and he talks really fast, and you'll be tempted at first to kind of like, I can't follow this. This guy's too smart for me. I know I've thought that way too, but just slow down, listen to him, and I think you'll find the points that he makes make a lot of sense here. My mom has actually listened to this episode prior to it releasing. I've already recorded this interview. She's heard it. And she said, Connor, I had to listen to this twice. And it's all I've been able to think about for the last few days. I keep processing this. So this one may take a minute to sink in, but it's very fascinating. And I'm really excited to hear your feedback. So make sure to send it to me. If you haven't followed us yet on our channels, do it. We're excited to hear your feedback. Enjoy the interview. Well, Patrick, thanks for joining us. It's fun to have you on. I don't have a ton of people that I point to as mentors when it comes to being a speaker, and people that I've looked at and said, hey, I love what that guy or that gal is doing. I want to try and emulate that. And you're one of those people. And I think what that's from is I saw your style, I saw your passion, and specifically what you do with history. And I said, man, that's something that I want to try to be a little bit more like. So this is so cool for me to actually have you on, to introduce you to my audience. And maybe they'll be like, I can see a little bit of where Connor gets some of that mentality. So Patrick, thanks for joining me. How are you today?
Well, thank you. I'm flattered and happy to be here. Sorry about the shoulder thing. Broke 6 ribs, a collarbone, and my shoulder in 3 spots mountain biking recently. So
that's
otherwise
rough.
I'm good.
Now, I got to start right here. I say you love history, and just your name, Patrick Henry Hansen. Does it get more like of a history guy than that? What's the story behind that?
I came from a very patriotic family, and when I was born, my original name was Nathaniel Andrew Hansen, and both my mom and dad actually felt inspired in the hospital to change my name to Patrick Henry after their favorite Revolutionary War hero. So I don't know, maybe it was destiny, I'm not sure. But since a young child, being raised around patriotic Americans, I've always felt taking great pride in the name. Patrick Henry was a very, very pivotal person in the early Revolution. And so a lot to live up to carrying that name. But he was also a great orator and a great speaker. I mean, I think he had 17 kids. His first wife died, and he had a bunch more, and good family man. And so it's an honor to have the name Patrick Henry as Patrick Henry Hansen. So yeah, that's the background.
I love it. And you're one of the most well-read people I know too. I'm just looking at your backdrop there. I know that is just a small fraction of your library and a few things that kind of give you a feel for what you're all about. Well, why do you feel such a tie to kind of the ancient history as well?
Partly because early on I was so ignorant of it. And when I first was exposed, it had, as a young man, heroics. A lot of the history that's ancient has the storyline that's kept in it because some of the details we just don't have. I mean, if you look at Homer's Iliad and that's not exactly history, but there's hero worship in there. And then that gets reflected from Thucydides and Herodotus and Plutarch and all these ancient historians that wrote these stories. It's his story, the history. Yeah. And it was sort of motivating, inspiring, interesting. I'm not exactly sure, but I mean, I now have a library of over 3,000 books and love to read specifically history, but it's also been very instructional. As you know, I've made the weird jump of sort of cross-pollinating history with business, with sales, with negotiation, with presentations, with management and leadership. And it's been a smashing success because as long as you keep it fairly brief and don't go into way too many details, which is hard for me sometimes, and you know, when there's a correlating principle that you can draw from history, people love it because people love stories. At the end of the day, part of the reason that people don't necessarily love history is because we've taken the story out of his story. And way too many historical teachers or football coaches who know nothing about it, way too many professors in our universities they've almost made history logistical. And when you take the story out of it, you take the inspiration out of it. And history is inspiring. I think part of the reason that I love history is that history is like a map. I mean, it's like a map to the future. And history is littered with what I would call success sticky notes. Some of them are even like neon lights that are just screaming. I mean, I look at America right now and I see some of those neon lights going off saying, don't go down this path. This is dangerous. And, you know, you can take history and you can apply it personally, professionally, financially. You can do it as a nation, as a country, obviously. So it has these, you know, I always say that history is like a compass that gives you your bearings. History is like the Big Dipper that points out the North Star rather than my truth. Because history is an accurate bearing on life rather than just some whimsical opinion of someone. The scary part today is that a lot of our popular whims, popular opinions, they're socially fashionable. They're causes that are popularized by sheeple that are eager to virtue signal their obedience to this adoring celebrity herd. They're unaware that they've simply broadcast their useful idiocy to a ruling elite class of people, these leftist shepherds who are more than happy to guide their Marxist flocks on this inevitable journey to the local slaughterhouse. That's what's happening with Antifa, with BLM, with these politicians. And, you know, there's something to be said when you call people sheeple, because shepherds glance backwards to move forward. Sheep only look down and forward. And it's easy for people to turn into sheeple, especially when they have very nefarious leaders to guide them on that. And it is a slaughterhouse. I mean, George Orwell said that, don't quote me exactly on this, but he basically said that the most effective way to destroy a people is to deny their understanding of their history. And that's why if you read 1984, history plays a very critical and important role. Even with Winston Smith, I mean, he worked for I forget the name of the department in 1984, but it was basically to change history in order to fit the purposes of their party. And there's some pretty Orwellian parallels that are going on with that today that are kind of scary. I mean, everyone knows that George Santayana's quote that those who don't learn from the past are condemned to repeat it, very popular. But there are more quotes than that could make that point in a similar way. A page of history is worth a volume of logic. That was a quote that I used from Cicero. Believe it or not, Donald Trump, I've been using this quote for 16 years? He said, too many countries, too many businesses have been destroyed by not understanding history. That was ironic with his speech last night.
Interesting. I love that. One, a lot to unravel there. I love that mindset of history changes when you look at it as a story. And I think that was one of the things you helped teach me of as a speaker, right? People remember speeches that have stories, right? Stories are what you remember. It's what you grasp onto. And I think when we look at history that way, all of a sudden, that's why I remember being in 6th grade and I would come home, and when my mom asked me, what did I learn at school today? I was telling his stories that I learned in history class, right? Like, oh, I learned this about General Patton or whatever it might be. And the minute that switch gets turned on of these are real people faced with real experiences, whether it was 50 years ago, 2,000 years ago, whatever it might be, and then trying to find those parallels to our day, you figured out a way to do that. And so I want to ask that question of, you talk about obviously where we're at as a country right now, making that tie to being sheep. With your understanding of history, is there a time period or time periods that you feel is very relevant to where we're at today as a country and what we're going through, in your opinion?
Yeah, there is. There's something in history that has symmetry in it. I mean, I call them symmetrical success principles. Historically, there's asymmetry and symmetry. And historically, you can look at past civilizations, past cultures, and you can draw out some fairly obvious issues, decisions that help them succeed. But there are also these historical cyclical patterns that you see. The one that I think most closely parallels with ours today is Rome. I told my kids about 2 years ago, as you and I chatted offline a little bit, I wasn't sure what to think of Trump. Man, when he came in, I wasn't exactly a supporter, but I knew that I didn't support Hillary. And I knew that the media was so manipulative and so dishonest and so biased that you could practically learn the truth by taking the opposite stance of the media. And I'm barely exaggerating on most issues. And so when Trump came in and started punching back, he has such a unique persona. And historically, I told my children, you're looking at a modern Julius Caesar. Now, Caesar had some faults too, but Caesar's only come around occasionally. Some argue maybe every once 1,000 years. We've never had a president like Trump. And I'm not a Trump worshiper. I'll freely criticize Trump when I think that he makes mistakes. Early on with the Twitter stuff, it did seem sometimes to be a little petty and small. But you don't just turn that switch on and off. If you're a fighter, you fight. And when you're under attack all the time, it's probably a little difficult just to pick and choose who, should I go after the Hollywood person or the joker in Congress or the media? So he has such a unique, powerful personality. He does remind me of a person that is an earth shaker. Every human being on this planet knows his name and utters it multiple times a day or a week. His enemies are obsessed with him in a way I've never seen. Oh, Bush lied, people died. They hated George Bush, but he was practically in their camp on most issues, and we all knew it. And so the obsession with him, I think, is a reflection that he really is this iconic personality that only comes around, centuries. I mean, you look historically, there aren't that many Trumps, and he is like Caesar. Now, I draw some parallels with Rome because Rome made many of the same mistakes. Rome about collapsed about 50 times. That's the dirty little secret people don't know. Rome wasn't this just straight escalating pinnacle of success historically and then suddenly dropped overnight. Rome had ups and downs and got invaded. Clear back in 480 BC, the Celts went in and kicked the crap out of them and took over Rome. And then you had Hannibal and you had politicians and but it sort of gradually molded. And where it hit its zenith and then when it hit its nadir, if you look at those, there were causes that precipitated some of them. And believe it or not, some of it had to do with the simple morality of the people coupled with immigration. This is the part that surprises people. And this is the part where I say there's a parallel historically with Trump and with our country, with Rome in a broader perspective. Rome ultimately fell because they lost the loyalty of their country. They lost patriotism. They actually lost this nationalism. Nationalism has absolutely been a word that's been attempted. It's recently resurrected, of course, but it was attempted to be linked with Nazism, which was National Socialism, the National Socialist Workers' Party of Germany. It was Nazi stood for. And so the fall of Rome has a parallel with the fall of this nationalistic fervor and patriotic protection of their family, their community, and their country. They were identified as Roman. If you read the Bible, I mean, when someone was a Roman citizen, go read the letters of Paul. When he became a Roman citizen, he was treated a certain way. The Romans kept themselves clean shaven to keep themselves separated from the barbarians, where you get the word barber. It's just my Corona beard, by the way. And
I love talking to you, because I mean, that's something people listening, I had no clue that's where the word barber came from.
Yeah, they were called barberism. Barber, that came from bearded. It was they had the Germans and the Celts primarily were super masculine, very warlike people. And boy, if you ever want to do a cool podcast with me, do one with me on the history of beards. It will blow your mind, the history of beards. I won't digress right now. It takes too long, but
we'll do that later. That'll be after the election, when we're not as much worried about that. We'll talk about beards.
Oh, you'll love it. It's really fascinating history, actually, because there's some real cultural ties with facial hair. It'd shock you. Abraham Lincoln grew a beard 3 weeks before his election for a very political reason. I mean, it's just crazy. So yeah, I digressed on my own digression there. But with Rome, they stopped being nationalists and they started to be globalists. There's a real direct correlation here, a parallel that we can learn from, because they started to allow non-Roman citizens. You know, you and I, let's just say you and I lived, you look like some Scandinavian guy, but let's just say you lived up in Middle England somewhere, and you lived under Roman Britannia. Because you lived in the province did not make you a Roman citizen. But let's just say you signed up for the military and you were in the military for 20 years. After 20 years, you earned your citizenship. And as a Roman citizen, you were absolutely treated differently. The law treated you differently. You had different rights. Again, biblically, there's a lot of reflection in that. And so they started to sort of ignore that, and they allowed international troops to come in. And then you basically had an emperor who just willy-nilly gave away citizenship. They allowed what today we would call illegal immigration, illegal aliens to flood in. But the difference was they gave them citizenship and they lost their nationality. And it wasn't racial. It wasn't racial. You had different races that had Roman citizenry, but the nationalistic fervor as being a Roman citizen, when it was so watered down and it no longer meant anything to be Roman, why then, if I'm across the Danube River, why if I'm a Slav, which, by the way, is where you get the word slave. It was from Germans enslaving Slavs. The Slavs, suddenly they were Roman soldiers and wanted to be citizens. Instead of earning that, it was handed to them and it was diminished. And with that diminishment of their borders and of their nationality, their being nationalists, it watered down and diminished the patriotism and the protection of what they were promoting, Pax Romana. And when that happened, you not just saw the fall of Rome, you saw an absolute exponential decline of the Roman Empire. And it didn't fall overnight, as people sometimes think. It took decades, but it happened fast. It was interesting. I don't know her name off the top of my head. I think it was the governor of North or South Dakota that spoke at the RNC. Naomi?
South Dakota. Kristi Noem.
Kristi Noem.
Yep.
I'm not sure if it was her who said it. I think it was basically recouched in a couple of ways, but where people said, it takes a long time to build a great nation, but it can be destroyed very quickly. And I've never seen it. You've never seen it. No one who's alive today has ever seen this level of antipathy. Yes, you had anti-war Vietnam underground stuff going on in the 60s, early 70s, of course. But even, quote, the liberals and the Democrats back then were considered patriotic. They worked together with Republicans to reach not just to reach consensus, not just to cave and compromise. I mean, Tip O'Neill working with, one of the most powerful speakers of the House of Representatives, ended up working with the Republicans in some cases where could you imagine seeing Nancy Pelosi do anything, even if it helped Americans, that would actually buttress or support Donald Trump? We both know the answer to that. This is new. And this is where I see the decline of patriotism on the left, this hatred for our history, they demonize good people and they deify criminals right in our faces. They ask us to not believe our own eyes. There's lies and deceit on a level. I can't believe they're getting away with it. And maybe they're not. That's the other part I've not reached a conclusion on, but it feels like at some level they are, because in our universities and in our media, there's this fervor for it. There's just this passionate leftist Marxist movement that has infiltrated our country and our culture in ways that we're seeing it in all these democratic cities. If that takes hold, and this is what I think Trump made a great point in his RNC speech last night, if that actually infiltrates into, quote, mainstream America, we're done. There is no American dream anymore because there's no America. America, like ancient Rome, if it loses its nationalistic love, its patriotic defense of what they were fighting for, what they believed in, what they were founded on. Remember, Rome was a republic initially. Our founding fathers studied Roman history to great extents to learn these lessons. So I'm blabbering on a little long here at that, but the parallels are real. And I've never with my own eyes seen the level of extremity that people are going to destroy, to tear down the very concept that gives them the right to tear it down.
Sure. I think this is interesting. A couple of questions I want to ask you in follow-up to that. One, I think it's pretty well documented that I don't think Donald Trump is the most well-read out there, right? Donald Trump is not a historian that's well-versed in all of this. And I think if he talked about what we just went through right there, I think a lot of it would maybe come as news to Donald Trump. Do you feel that that's something, I mean, as you show those parallels, Trump has said from the beginning, a country without borders isn't a country, right? He's made a lot of these same speeches that you've just made. Do you think that's just a common sense feel type of thing to him? Or do you think there are people giving him consultation or whatever it might be to help him feel that way?
I think there's two factors. One, I clearly distinguish the difference between schooling and education today. You have people who go through 13 years of government education and then 4 or 5 years of universities, and they are overschooled and undereducated. I think some of the old school folks, some of the baby boomers, like Donald Trump, truly received an education when they were young. They weren't just schooled, they were educated. He got an excellent education, and I'm sure a lot of that had to do with history. I don't think he has some passion for history, some passion for economics, but I do think he got a very strong foundation. He also is attacked as being dumb. And you'll notice that he doesn't necessarily fight that the way he fights the other stuff, because sometimes playing dumb can be really smart. And of course, they consider anyone who's not on the left dumb. I mean, everyone. Reagan was dumb, and Bush. Everybody's dumb who's not, of course, in their corner. So I think my guess is, and I don't know this for a fact, but my observation is this man is very well educated. So that's the first thing. So I think that he has some of the foundation historical facts there. In his speech last night, he didn't go into the details of the Lewis and Clark expedition or the Treaty of Versailles after World War One. I don't think he concerns himself with the details. I think this guy thinks big, and he thinks big picture. I love his quote when he said, if you're going to think, you might as well think big. So I think he's much more intelligent than people actually give him credit for. How could you possibly? I see these clowns like Don Lemon and these idiots in the leftist media that try to mock Trump for being stupid. And I look at them and think, who are you to, are you so unaware of how ridiculous you look? This man, no one achieves what this man achieves if he's stupid. You think this is some haphazard random accident that kind of maybe sort of on a good day with a downhill wind that this man spanked and crushed 17 other Republicans, experienced politicians, and then took on the most powerful political war room in the history of the world, the Clinton war room? This just randomly because, people are racist, so they voted for him? I mean, how dumb would you have to be to reach that conclusion? So I think he's much more intelligent than we think. I think he's got a better education than people give him credit for. And I think he thinks big picture. And when you combine those three things together, I don't think he worries about the details as much. I think that's why he's got super smart people around him that are more logistical engineering types who are super smart and who know that stuff. Yeah. Get that done. The objective is X. Did you see his agenda? I was so pleased to see this actually. There was no platform at the RNC this year. Every year there's these stupid arguments about the party platform and pro-life language, and then they give lip service to it and ignore it. Instead of focusing on the party platform the way the Democrats did, because their party platform is damn near a Marxist manifesto. And I'm not even attempting to exaggerate. He went through his agenda. Have you looked at that agenda, just the bullet points?
I haven't actually.
Oh, pull it up. It is clean. It is succinct. It is to the point, and they're all objectives. Here's the objective. He even has one, I believe, that's listed as defund police. And he's got these bullet points that just go right to the jugular. They don't mess around with all the pretty cute, fancy party platform language and terminology. It looks more like a lawsuit. And instead, he lays it out. I also have found with him, he purposefully tries to keep things simple, one-page, double-sided type stuff, because he realizes people are busy. Most people are not, policy wonks and don't want to be, but they love their country. They want to be informed, but geez, I got 2 kids and a soccer practice and bills to pay and people aren't there reading, Mises on economics at night. They're trying to escape watching the shows. And so I think he's recognized the political form that we're in and ironically outsmarted all the political class, the political elites, the political consultants, and just destroyed them by doing that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely been a Trumpism that as he campaigns, if it's something you can chant, all the better, right? As simple as drain the swamp, build the wall, lock her up, whatever it is, right? Like that simplicity he knows people will gravitate to. Patrick, I want to ask you a question for sure.
And name calling. I mean, that's at first everybody thought it was petty. I kind of did too at first, but it dawned on me. I could no longer think certain people without his quote. And when I literally was in the shower, and was just thinking about something I'd heard on a podcast, and the names that he linked, that he created for these people, I was using subconsciously, and then it came out consciously, and I wasn't attempting it, and it literally stopped me in my tracks, and I went, "Holy criminy! That is unbelievable, the influence that has had on me, and I didn't even know it."
For sure. Oh, I've said it before on the podcast that the minute he labeled Jeb Bush as low energy Jeb, that destroyed his political career in one moment, because every time you see Jeb Bush, you're like, yeah, that guy is boring. He is low energy, right? And I think that
Hillary and
Yes. I mean, Lion Ted. I will
Yeah,
always
Lion
look at
Ted.
Ted Cruz as Lion
Luckily,
Ted.
that relationship flipped around, but yes,
Yeah.
I mean, you can't ignore it. And so, to me, there's a it correlates to your question earlier. There's a pattern here, and it's don't overcomplicate it. Well, let me share with you the 5 things I disagree with about Hillary. It's crooked Hillary. Yeah, okay, and they'll argue and debate if he gets to it, but he doesn't ever seem to lose focus on objectives. I think
Yeah.
that's part of the reason that people around him have been able to achieve these things on his behalf, because he is the point on the spear, and everything, all the momentum behind it is coming from all those people, but he's the point. He's the one who guided that missile right into that target, and he never let it get off course with all of the distractions and the noise and the political confusion that gets tossed out there. So
Yeah.
it's, in an odd way, it's the most genius approach to politics possibly in the history of the world. And it's this: don't overcomplicate, simplify. Simplicity sticks, but make your point a dagger. I mean, he's going after enemies. He's going after concepts and beliefs that need to be destroyed in some cases. And he doesn't pussyfoot around them like politicians do.
Yeah. I want to ask you this from a mindset of a historian. There's obviously a big push in our country right now for erasing history. We've talked about questioning the founding fathers, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. There's no doubt that history is told by the victors, right? And I think for the most case, people aren't as great as we say they are, or as bad as they really are. We say they are when it comes to history, right? But what is your thought of how do we find that balance of recognizing that some of our history is ugly? We've got to reconcile that. We need to recognize it and know that, hey, we can't ignore it. We can't just assume it's all flowery while still keeping that patriotism like you've talked about.
But you see, that's where I think the most patriotic people are aware of the flaws. You know, I have 6 kids, and I've learned inadvertently, accidentally, that sometimes when a kid has a little struggle or a challenge and you have to help them work on it, it makes you a lot closer to them. And it kind of creates a little bit of a bond there where you know that they did something wrong and you're helping them even through punishment in some cases. And as long as they know it's coming from a perspective of love and of growth. This is the difference. When you look at our historical faults, they are so exaggerated by the left. And all of the triumphs and achievements that Americans have made are just set aside because this is where the left has been way in front of the right. And I think Trump is mimicking it a little bit on a strategic level. Race. They don't get off of it. They have race guilted America into making horrible policies on behalf of blacks. The worst thing you can possibly do for a human being is make them a victim rather than a victor. And that's what we've done to the black community with these leftist, democratic, now Marxists, openly Marxist, socialists, where they have created this permanent dependent class of people. They won't educate them. They'll school them, but they won't educate them. And they keep them in this heightened state of fear and anxiety, so that you now see every time a black person sees a cop, they see racism. Now when they're around white people, it's changing. And they're doing that on purpose because it's through that fear and the division that the left, historically, not just in America, that's where they get their power. You'll notice something. The left never builds anything. And this will correlate directly as an answer to your question, but the left doesn't ever build anything, ever. China has to steal all of our technology, right? Whatever they build, they don't invent, they don't innovate, they don't build. The left tears things down. Has Bernie Sanders ever built a business? Did Barack Obama ever build anything? And then they want to destroy and take. They are not builders, ironically what Trump is. And so the left ends up sort of siphoning away and destroying, and they're doing the same thing to history. They do it with economics. We take, we don't produce. We take from the producers, we give it to the non-producers. We punish accomplishment, we reward, I don't want to say failure, but we reward, what's the word I'm searching for here? People who have not achieved the same thing. It's
Sure.
the most gross inequity in the history if you do that. You go work 20 hours a week, you innovate, you risk, you take the loans, you work out of your basement, you mortgage your home, you spend time away from your family, you build a business, you become a millionaire, but you're the jerk. And Bernie Sanders and socialists and leftist Marxists want to punish you and then take that money and give it to someone who's not willing to make those sacrifices, and then try to blame it on social, cultural things. So at the end of the day, our history has to be destroyed by the left because their narrative can't progress without destroying. That's why my quote to you with Orwell, the fastest way to destroy a people is to sever their link to their past, their heroes, their accomplishments, focus on their faults, invent new ones, exaggerate the ones they had. What's incredible about America with regard to race is not that we had slavery, it's that we freaking ended it. England didn't end it. Go look at the British Empire 100 years ago today. I mean, we ended it. 600,000, primarily whites, lost their lives in a civil war over this topic, man.
Yeah.
And it's sickening to me. So let me put this a little more succinctly in an answer for you. We have to know our faults to know our successes. You have to know what the 3/5 clause was and why it actually went to benefit blacks. It was absolutely to restrict representation in slave-owning states. I mean, if you know the Connecticut Compromise, if you go look at the history of the Constitutional Convention, when you read the Federalist Papers, when you see these arguments that are going on, you recognize what was happening and why these fights were going on. And then you hear someone like Jesse Jackson blurt out, "You're 3/5 of a person." It's like, you fool. If you had any historical knowledge, you would recognize that's something you ought to, in a sense, be praising, because it was people fighting to minimize the control of the Dixiecrat, Democrat, leftist slave owners.
Yeah.
And
it's interesting. It's an interesting take there. I want to ask you this in closing, Patrick. The whole point of this podcast, right, is this millennial in the middle mindset that I think so often we are told that it's absolutes, extreme left, extreme right. It's no secret that your understanding from history, you are on the right. You are more conservative because of your background in history. That's what you feel, and no one can take that away from you, right? With that said, what would you say? I mean, there's no doubt. I think my more conservative listeners today have probably loved this last 20 minutes. My more liberal listeners, which there are a lot, are maybe sitting there going, this guy, he's just furthering the divide. This is just what I thought, right? This isn't coming together. This isn't the whole point of this podcast. How can we still embrace what you're talking about today, but doing it in a way that's inclusive rather than trying to make an us-them mentality?
Well, I don't think that there's an equal attempt to unity. Go look at the DNC convention and the RNC convention. Go look at, do you see a bunch of people on the right trying to divide? And do you see is anyone in Antifa on the right? Not one. The BLM movement, it's not on the right. I don't think it's everything's in the middle and equal and that we're all just need to come along and ho-ho. I think that there are some real clear distinctions and that should be the middle. You know, when the observation about right left gets confused sometimes. Historically, it needs to be simplified and understood, because what is right left? What is it? I have a degree in political science, and I was surprised that even professors, I confronted a professor well, who didn't understand it. And after I told him, he honestly was embarrassed. But it's this simple. On the left, 100% left is 100% total government, totalitarianism. 100% right is zero government, anarchy, total anarchy. Historically, when you say we don't ever want to be right in the middle of that. Our Constitution certainly is not in the middle of socialism and capitalism. It's not in the middle of totalitarianism and anarchy. Our founding fathers recognized that the human nature was to exploit and capitalize on power. That is why federalism is in place, because it's the checks and balances between states and the federal government. Right now, sadly, if you ask most people, name the three stooges or the three branches of government, which one do you think they'd get right more often? They don't even, where that balance comes in is where understanding what right and left even means. And so I am not an extreme right. I don't even call myself a conservative, by the way. I call myself a libertarian, because I'm a Jeffersonian libertarian. That government which governs least governs best. I believe in people, free people, not coercion. And so when you look at the Constitution and where the founding fathers fell, they fell towards smaller government. And that sort of, you look at left, right, you have to do that, sometimes by topics for people. Like, you have the religious right. Today, I believe the millennials and where you're going is a healthy direction, because I do believe that some of the obvious negative consequences of extreme leftism. When people say that Nazism is on the far right, this is such an obvious, blatant, gross use of the word. And they've done it on purpose. You can find this in the leftist writings. After World War II, the left recognized the hatred that was coming towards Marxism, and they transferred tons of it to Nazism. We hated both back then because both of them are far left. National Socialist Workers' Party, Nazism is far left. Communism is extreme far left. So this is where the terms right, left, middle, that requires a little bit of definition. So for your listeners, I want to conserve the correct political and philosophical principles that promote freedom. The more rugged individualists we have out there, the more freedom that you and I and all your listeners can actually exercise, the better our lives will be. The more coercion, the more force, and that's what government is. It's force. You don't do what the government says, you get penalized financially, or your liberty, you go to jail. The more freedom we have, the greater success we can have, because you can't find success financially in a coerced economy. So whether it's selfish for you personally, whether it's for your country, your community, your family, the right-left thing can get a little bit dicey when they're calling Nazis far right and communists far left. You're like, whoa, I don't want to be on the far right. I'm not a Nazi. And yet that term has been so misused, because Nazis are far left and communists are extreme left. And when people say far right, what do they mean? It becomes something that needs to be defined a little bit, because how you define the far right, yes, if that's Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, my God, I'm in the middle. But if you simply look at the scale as total or zero government, which is what the political scale is, they're both on the far left.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think what you just demonstrated right there is our tendency to oversimplify, right? And I think when we try to understand any of these things, we have to assume complexity. We talked about this in a few episodes ago, that it is, people that want us to just feel, oh, it's all right, it's all left. We'll simplify what this means, kind of wash it down and just get you to take this. There's always so much more there. And I feel that's the power that comes as we become more informed, more educated, specifically in our history, understanding where we were and how we've gotten to where we are today. So, Patrick, I appreciate you coming on and doing this so much. Tell my audience where they can find you. I know it's a 4-part series book that does a great job of basically tying history into sales, management, speaking, communication. Tell them where they can find this.
Amazon. Just type in Patrick Henry Hansen. All my books will come up. It's a series of books called From Great Moments in History. And from there, if you're interested, you can find me from that with my businesses and trainings and that. But it's, yeah, those are the 4 books. I have another book that is completed and done called 100 Words That Will Make You Rich, which I'll send to you. You'll like it.
Love it.
Vocabulary, vernacular, having a good lexicon when you communicate and the impact it can have. And I've got 2 more following that on leadership management that also have quite a bit of history in them. In fact, the lexicon book, I'll share with you quick. What I do is I give a definition. I, of course, give the synonyms, the antonyms, the etymology of the book. And then I give a vocational example. I then give a motivational example, and then I give a historical example of the word being used, all on one page.
Huh.
So just
that is really cool.
tries to link in the actual utilization of certain words that will make you sound more cerebral. That's one of the words. But remind me to I'll send you an e-copy of it. It's getting published here, printed actually in about 2 weeks. But anyway, that's where they can find me. And
awesome.
I want to say back to you, congrats on your show. It's only going to grow and get bigger. You are naturally a very talented, gifted guy. You got drive. I love what you're doing here. I'm glad you even invited me on your show with it. But the world needs more discussion and more conversation that's intelligent, but also that has meaning and purpose behind it. To me, that's patriotic. That's trying to build America, whether you're kind of in that middle or a little on the right of it or left of it. Your objective is still to promote what makes life good for yourself and for others. And ultimately, that's the purpose of government. So I think your show is needed, and I think you're going to be a smashing success with it.
Well, I appreciate it, Patrick. Thank you. Thank you for coming on. I end every show the same way. Clowns to the left me, jokers to the right. Here I am, stuck in the middle with you. I wasn't expecting you to sing with me. It's all right. All right. Hey, thanks, Patrick. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. Have a good one.
Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Here I am, stuck in